Hewie Clarkson looked up at the flashing neon sign and thought, it's the only way. There's nothing else left to try, so my last chance. Those bloody doctors. The sign splashed blood-red letters 10 metres high across the sky. Cold sleep. Huey's gaze dropped 20 stories to the entrance foyer. There was a queue, of course. There was always a queue once a price had come down. He threaded the path through the traffic jam, and he pressed his nose against plate glass. He scanned the latest quote. It was down to 400. The price continued to fall as more people bought a ticket, and they were going in the thousands now. It'd still take his last penny, but he was tired of waiting. He could manage it, and he would. As he joined the end of the queue, fragments of hushed talk filtered through to him. Safe enough, I suppose. Did you ever hear of anyone who didn't wake? Stupid, how could you? Huey's lip curled as he studied pain-racked faces. Most of them only imagined they were ill. There was a name for that, but he couldn't remember it. Lucky for them, they didn't have the trouble he had to put up with. Uniformed ushers kept the queue moving. Get him in quick before they change their minds. That's what Huey thought. He reached the portal, and cool air struck his face. It was more than cool, it was chill. Not just a contrast with the summer heat bouncing off the pavement, but the chill leaking out from freeze chambers. The queue split just inside the door, men to one side, women to the other. Huey arrived at a desk and he filled out an application form. The man behind the desk studied the answers and looked up. You're not married, Mr. Clarkson. You seem to have a reasonable job. Can I ask you what's your problem? Huey expanded on his troubles, the way he felt, the fears he had, the doctors he'd been to. Quacks, he stated bitterly. Peasants. One and all pretend there's nothing wrong with me. Me, when I've had just about everything in my time. Their incompetence. He lowered his voice to a confidential whisper. I can't sleep at night now, it's that bad. I've come to the conclusion it's cancer. It can't be anything else but cancer. Cancer gets me the cold sleep, doesn't it? The interviewer doodled with a stylo and he nodded. We still have to be a little bit more definitive though, Mr. Clarkson. It's the law. You must sign a positive statement to the effect that you're incurable at this present time. He produced another form. If you'll sign this. Who he signed, held his credit card up to the closed circuit screen, and the computer cleared it with his bank. OK, you're in. A white-coated attendant motioned him to join the next queue. Big business, yeah? Huey said. I bet you're stacking them away. The attendant ignored him. The queue shuffled along beneath a wall-sized poster that proclaimed, Sleep your way to health. Low temperature stops body decay. Future doctors can cure you. Huey didn't bother reading the small print. He'd seen it all before on TV ads. Cryogenic treatment had been fantastically expensive when first introduced, but since the breakthrough the price had dropped till almost anyone could afford the chances of a later, pain-free life. And not just that, youth and vigour, longevity. They descended concrete steps to a vast chamber. It was cold, really cold. The walls were stacked with tanks containing what looked like the living dead, bank after bank of them. Pumps throbbed like giant heartbeats. New tanks were being filled with liquid helium. This was a mass-produced system. Huey realised this one vault alone could handle thousands, and now there were hundreds of them in operation. Strip off. Eagerly, Huey removed his clothes and climbed onto the table. The table, he observed, could be tilted so he'd slide down into the quick-freeze tank that would hold his life in suspension till the doctors had a cure for him. He wondered how long he might have to wait. 10 years? 20? 50? Someone muttered, I wonder if they'll ever find a cure for hypochondria. He felt the bite of a needle, and he knew he was on his way. Hewie Clarkson woke. He blinked at the future which greeted him with a brilliance of light. It was pleasantly cool, and the distant walls and ceiling were an antiseptic white. Relief coursed through him at the realisation. He had been brought out of the freeze tank and revived. He raised his head cautiously and looked about him. An operating theatre, no doubt of that, and a large one. He appeared to be entirely surrounded by tables with white-coated surgeons busy each one. He assumed his own team was not ready for him. A voice somewhere behind him shouted, It's a waker! Prepare a hypo! Strong arms pressed Huey down on the operating table and held him firmly. Still groggy from the freeze, he asked, You've diagnosed my case then, I suppose. It was cancer, was it? And you got a cure? Oh, yeah, we got a cure all right, mate. A nurse moved into view holding a syringe. Well, that's efficient, Huey thought. Every little thing's organised. He felt glad he'd made the trip. Will you have to operate? He asked. Operate? Echoed a voice. Why should we? There's far too many people in this world without bringing back sleepers. Not many wake, but you're not the first. Huey struggled to understand. His gaze travelled beyond the row of tables as a nurse carried away an amputated limb. Against the far walls were glass tanks. Tanks containing left and right arms, left and right legs, Hearts, kidneys, eyeballs, blood. Sheets of skin hung on racks. Hewie gulped hard. This wasn't how he'd imagined a hospital of the future. It was more like an abattoir. His gaze settled on the nurse again. She'd taken a limb from a table and was putting it in one of the tanks. Something screamed in his mind as a trolley was wheeled alongside him, a trolley bearing knives and saws. "This place is just cold storage," a bored voice said. "I don't suppose it matters telling you now." The man's eyes widened and he seemed to get a ferocious thrill from imparting this. "We maintain a stock of sleepers for spare parts. We use you sleepers mainly for accident cases." "I'm not your spare parts!" Hewie struggled convulsively, powered by extreme terror. They held him firmly whilst the nurse inserted a hypodermic. He watched as a hand picked up a saw. Before he passed into the coldest sleep of all.